Guess who's back? Back again. BEACN's back. Tell a friend. I am playing around with the BEACN Studio. This thing is amazing, but it's also kind of revealing this continual problem of workflow upgrades for content creators like myself. There is no perfect device at the moment, and I don't think it's any individual manufacturer's fault. And I think should the perfect device be made, people would complain about the price, which is what happened with the Go XLR. Long term, I had a lot of complaints with the Go XLR about the sound of the compressor, the way the EQ was handled, a lot of little things like that. But input and output wise, it was almost like the absolute perfect device in terms of having XLR, 3.5 mil, optical. You had a lot going for it in that regard. And the devices we've gotten since, even my main interface, which is right below my camera here, which is typically the Rodecaster Duo, I still find myself very limited when I need tertiary inputs. It's almost like we need a dedicated interface like the BEACN box here. Sorry, BEACN Studio as it's now called. And an old school like Yamaha analog mixer. And that's really hard. But first, let's talk about the interface. This is BEACN's first offering since the original launch, pretty much, where they had the Mix Create, and the BEACN mic. And I kind of infamously did not like the sound of the microphone. I did not like the way that it was tuned internally. The more I learned about it, the more I learned that it was just tuned in a way that to me was too intentionally punchy. It was too trying to fake it in terms of like the broadcast Markiplier voice. And it made it difficult for me, as tuned in as I am to EQing my voice, it made it difficult for me to kind of bring it back to where I wanted to sound. Oh, big drama ensued with the company. All that's behind us. This new product is pretty sick because of one main feature, but also because of the core features that I fell in love with BEACN products for in the first place. When you first install the BEACN app and plug in BEACN Studio, if you've seen any of the BEACN products before, this looks identical. But if you haven't, they have a beautiful suite here of customization for how your microphone sounds. This might feel overwhelming, but I promise you this is the most beginner-friendly UI for mixing and for building up your microphone sound that I have seen. And now Elgato have taken some inspiration from this and fixed up their EQ VST plugin, which unfortunately is VST3, so it doesn't work with OBS, but I use it a lot in my Adobe Audition processing, as well as even in my Ableton projects sometimes, because I love the UI for it, because it looks just like this. But by default, your EQ is probably going to look like this. Looks a little silly. Turn on Advanced EQ and turn on Guide before you do anything else. And then ignore all of this, and we're going to come down here to the mic setup. This is where you set up your gain. So phantom power, on or off, depending on if you have a condenser microphone or a microphone with an amplifier built in, like the SM7DB. You need that on, but make sure you turn this off or unplug your BEACN device before plugging in or unplugging a microphone, or you will have problems. Then you set your gain. So you just want to talk like normal, and you want your speaking volume to be in this blue speaking area, and then your peaks to get up into the peaks area. This device has 32-bit float processing, which means that even if you clip, so to speak, you're not actually going to clip. Like if you get too loud, like right now, theoretically that didn't clip. I'm looking at my Audacity recordings. I am screaming at the top of my lungs. It brings it back down for you. Absolutely magical. One of the big selling points of their hardware. Love it. So you set your gain so that when you're talking, normally you're in the speaking area. Otherwise, your peaks are kind of up here, but you don't want to spend too much time in the peak area to get the best results. Then you come over here to noise suppression. They have a really cool adaptive noise suppression, which I think is bugged in this beta reviewer firmware that I'm using, or software that I'm using, because every time I switch profiles, which you're admittedly not going to do often if you're not a reviewer switching microphones a bunch, but every time I switch profiles, the adaptive noise suppression just seems to not work. But when it works, it's great. But otherwise, with the snapshot, it's really cool, because all you do is hit take snapshot and then don't make any sound, and it's going to read the background sound of your room, which is this blue line. This white line is what noise is coming out of your microphone. This blue line is the detected noise, and it's just going to remove that based on that. So I'm going to shut up. By the way, I have my AC full blasting. If we turn this off, You can kind of hear it. It's loud over some of the other mics. My AC is absolutely blasting right now. But we're going to take snapshot, and it's going to pick up the background noise. You see that white noise, that white line was the noise that it detected. The blue line is now the saved noise print of room tone that it's removing. And I sound much better. It sounds incredible. This is one of the best noise reduction tools built into an audio interface or mixer that I have ever seen. I said that before. I'm gonna stick with it here. So that is one way to remove noise from your background. Great. The next is an expander. This is kind of like a noise gate, but you set it at the point at which it will just kind of expand downwards and make everything quiet. And so in between sentences, when you have a long enough pause, you see I have these valleys here. You kind of want to tune this if you want to use it. You honestly, if I turn it off, you don't really need it with the noise suppression on. It's more like an and or, but you can use either. But you want to tune it so that those valleys, when you stop talking, it just barely clips into those. So maybe I'll raise that a tiny bit. And that's just going to push the really quiet parts down. But if you have it too high, it's going to start cutting into your voice. Like if I do this, I probably start sounding a little funky, and it's not going to sound great. Yeah. And you can see the red is like the part that it's removing. So we want to really kind of tune it to where it's barely touching anything. But like I said, with the noise suppression, you honestly don't need it. So I'm just going to turn it off. Next is the compressor. By default, it's in simple mode here. I like advanced mode because this is a normal compressor that you'd have in any of your audio stuff. If you don't know what it basically takes the louder parts. Like if I start getting really loud, you can see there, it takes the louder parts and squishes them down to keep a more even level. And then you use some makeup gain so that everything stays a little bit more flat and even. It removes the dynamic range from your audio, but makes it so that you're more clearly detected. Typically for voiceovers, a range of 3 to 4 to 1 is used. Normally I'd tune the attack and release a little bit more, but I'm gonna leave it as is. And so with the threshold, that is the level at which once you start getting higher above it, it will start squishing it down. So the higher above -15, which is what I have it set to right now, the more it will squish it down. So if we set it really low, then it's going to really start squishing my audio and remove even more range, but it's also going to make me sound a little bit more punchy, a little bit more broadcasty, sometimes more flattering, sometimes not flattering. For me, I prefer a higher threshold so that it's just kicking in to get rid of those peaks when I really start getting loud. And lastly, we have headphones. Here you can control your individual headphone volume level as well as your mic monitoring level, and you can control that the same or independently. I like doing them a little bit separately because the mic monitoring that's built in here runs a little hot, meaning that it's very loud compared to what you might expect, and you're going to think that you're louder in your mix than you are because it's playing to your headphones louder. So I like keeping that a little bit lower. You can also apply an EQ profile to your headphone output if you want to tweak it. If you set this up, turn this off while you're tweaking your actual EQ, or it's going to throw everything off. I never use these. And then you have different amp powers for the headphone amps based on IEMs, line level if you're running to speakers or something, which is great. One of my biggest complaints about this device right now is that it does not have a dedicated like bespoke speaker output. Normal power, and then high impedance mode for certain headphones. I am using the DT900 Pro X from Beyerdynamic, which typically runs a little bit higher impedance, but I don't find myself needing to enable the high impedance mode to get pretty solid sounding output here. So I'm digging that. You can turn on a loudness guide so you can see where your levels are supposed to be in your mic output here. Hello, 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 hello. I don't know how much that makes a difference. And then lastly, but certainly not least, is the wonderful EQing suite they have for your microphone. So by default, like I said, the guide is off. Turn on this guide. It shows you what the different frequencies of audio do to your voice. So the high end is the highs and airs. That's the presence. So like if I'm going to duplicate this profile so I don't mess it up. If I crank this up, we start getting really crispy and really like you get a little bit crunchy, you get the mouth sounds of my voice. I need to take a drink of water. You really emphasize those. Then this is the low and mid highs. I typically don't do a lot for my voice in this range because a lot of my head voice kind of lives here. But I also have constant allergies and I'm very congested all the time. So my voice often comes out nasally. So I will turn this down a fair bit. Pro tip for EQing your voice. If you're curious how, like if you're struggling with like small adjustments on any frequency to know what it's doing to your voice, just crank it all the way. Like if I crank this up right now, it sounds like I have a clothespin over my nose. So I can hear what effect that's having on my voice. And then if I turn it all the way down, you can see now I'm missing a lot of clarity because that's missing. So I'm going to turn it back up here. I just want to remove some of that nasaliness without making it hard to understand me. Now, I had this complaint before. They define the like 500, like 300 to 700 range focused on 500 hertz here as broadcast. I don't entirely understand it because typically this is where your like boxiness lives. Like this is where it's going to sound like you're in a cardboard box or you have very tight walls around you. Like there's nothing good here, but also removing it kind of negatively impacts your sound a little bit. So I typically just don't mess with it, or I'll just tone it down a tiny bit. Your bass and muddiness, depending on your voice, it's going to be a little different. For me, the 250 hertz range is where I start getting really muddy. If I crank that up, you can see here, it just sounds like I'm eating the mic or I'm talking behind a wall. And so I turn that down, but my voice's actual bass lives closer to the sub bass range. And so I emphasize that just a tiny bit. And then I've got, you can change the different type of EQ filters here. I've got a high pass filter over here, so I'm not booming your subwoofer too much. And you could do a low pass filter on the high end if you wanted as well. They also have a de-esser. So I'm currently using a shotgun mic. This is the Sennheiser MKH416. It is very up close on me, so it is going to emphasize a lot of those lower or higher frequencies. So if I turn off the de-esser, you can see it starts to get really crunchy, especially with this exciter. The exciter and the de-esser play hand in hand for like countering each other. And so you can tweak the range for the exciter. The exciter just makes the higher end of your voice sound a little bit more crispy. I actually like it a lot, especially on some of the microphones I use, especially for my voice. But then you want to tweak the de-esser. So you can just scroll your scroll wheel over this. Scroll your scroll wheel. You can see it doesn't get rid of the S sound, but it makes it a lot less harsh. I usually leave it somewhere around there. Exciter, I already explained that a little bit. It just makes the higher end a little bit more crispy flispy. You don't want to use too much, especially if you have mouth sounds. It will absolutely destroy your viewers' ears, or it might turn them on to ASMR, I guess, in the creepy kind of ASMR, the not real ASMR. And then they have bass enhance. So this is fun. This plays hand in hand with your, you know, your low shelf you might do here. And in fact, I didn't even do a low shelf. I probably want to do more like that. But honestly, I don't know how to describe it. Yeah, just a new level, a new way to add deep bass to your voice. There's not a clear explanation of it, but it's really cool. And you get to watch this like balloon on the EQ curve as they expand ranges without boosting the whole EQ. And it's a lot of fun. And it's really interesting to tune your voice, especially if you have any sort of lower voice like I do. And so if I crank it up here, then we can really start to see the effect and start to hear how it impacts my voice. So this is bass enhance 1. This is bass enhance 2. And you can see here, this one gets real muddy for me. This one I do not like. It makes me sound like I sound like a demon in an anime. Low intelligibility for that one for me. For your voice in my work. Bass enhance 3 covers a massive range, and now it sounds like I'm speaking through an AM radio. This is WVOX Vox Radio with your traffic forecast for the day. We've got rush hour traffic everywhere, ladies and gentlemen. It is an absolute train wreck. Nobody knows how to drive anymore ever since the pandemic, and it is causing pile up after pile up. If you can, just ride your bike where you're going or stay home. And for this specific microphone, I like living on bass enhance 4. Of course, you don't want to crank it up all the way. 3 or 4 is usually the sweet spot for me, but then it really starts kind of emphasizing my voice. Now, if we go back to my originally constructed profile here, I am going to tweak my low shelf that I forgot to switch the point over here. My cat is meowing into the microphone, and I'd say I've built up a really good sounding sound for this microphone. Again, this is a shotgun mic. I'm going to crank up my mic monitor. And like I said, it gets really hot in your microphone, in your headphones. It gets really loud. So you gotta know that you don't sound quite like this. But shotgun microphone up close, putting my mouth right on it, but avoiding plosives. It's time to kick ass and chew bubble gum. And I'm all out of gum. You get to have a lot of fun with it. Really just eat the mic and have a little bit of fun here. Unfortunately, a bit of a complaint I have is if you drag your mic monitor, it's probably intentional, but if you drag it up to match your headphone, then it'll like start to link it. It's not doing it now, but you just saw like I drug it up and then it linked and started bringing my headphone monitor down, even though I didn't want that. So that's the basic setup. And like, it sounds pretty good, But of course, this is a very expensive microphone. How does it sound on other expensive microphones? Remy really wants to be in the video, y'all. Can you say something for the audience? Hello? What you got to say? Meow. Meow. Good contribution. Earthworks Ethos with a custom paint job by yours truly. Also sounds pretty great. SM7B with 45 decibels of gain. Not a problem at all. And you need less noise suppression with this one as well. Beyond that, you have the mixing section, which is really advanced and a lot of fun. You have a bunch of default virtual audio devices that the program assigns. So it has default audio devices for your microphone, chat for voice chat like Discord, music, browser, game, system, and then you can add hardware devices. So like I've added my Rodecaster Duo that's also connected. So if I wanted sound from my Mac over here, I could do that. There's another way you could do that with this device. I'll show you in a minute. But since I already have all this hooked up, I hooked that up. You could also just add your capture card here. You also have link from the second port, which I will talk about in just a minute. Then down here, you have your personal mix, where you get to control your individual levels for your personal mix, and you can control the levels of each individual source on how they're routed to your personal mix. And you can also toggle between two devices. So you have your headphones, and then for me, what are my speakers here? And you can toggle between them. Then you have your audience mix, and you can control the total level for that. Down here, you have assignments. So you can change the default Windows assigned devices to the individual Beacon devices here. And you have a whole routing table. So you can control what goes to your voice chat mic device, to your audience mix device, to your personal mix. You can control all of that here as well, which is really great. And then you can click any of these icons to mute those devices too. Really deep stuff here, like really awesome integrations. The fact that you can just like add your capture card is a huge win for mixing and for actually being able to listen to everything. Like this is incredible. And what's a lot of fun is they have this applications section down here. So if you start playing something like say my most recent music album or my Analog Dreams album, you can see here it automatically detected Microsoft Edge as a browser and assigned it to the browser device. But I could also drag it to game. I could drag it to anything and it's going to show you each program that's producing audio and where it goes, which is really cool. Link to that in the description. So really powerful stuff here. Enhanced further by the second USB port on the back of the device. That is the BEACN Link port. And this you can plug into a second PC and get up to 4 channels of audio back and forth, which is awesome. You have to install the BEACN Companion app on that second PC. And just like with the Rodecaster Duo, you get a couple audio devices that you can then route sound to on that computer and add it into your mixer here in BEACN Link or in the BEACN app. You also can plug it into a PlayStation 5, and I will show you that as well because holy cow, this is going to make my life so much easier. But if you go over here, I've already plugged it into my PS5, so if I go over here to settings, sound, you can see here it shows up both as the microphone and the audio output, which is wonderful. And if I go to adjust Microsoft, whoa, if I go to adjust microphone level, yeah, I've never sounded this good on PlayStation. It's wonderful. Like there's been a lot of devices that have tried to give you console interoperability and it's always been kind of flaky for me, whereas this is nearly perfect, but it's only for PS5. That is the frustrating part. Now, if you have other consoles, you could loop them in through other devices like I did with the hardware here. Like if you have another way of adding in audio, either through your capture card or secondary audio capture hardware, you can just keep looping all this in. And obviously there's going to be some degree of load with regards to audio latency and processing time and everything. And I've certainly experienced my fair share of DPC latency issues, which is why I primarily main a Mac these days for work. But you get a lot of flexibility there. I do think this is where I get kind of frustrated at the lack of perfect device for me for having a big multi-computer audio routing setup where I want some sort of console input, even if it's TRS or 3.5 millimeter input coming out of my TV or something, or an optical input, dual USB for different computers, plus extra analog input for tertiary computers. I think the future of audio setups is going to be a powerful audio interface like this, or the Elgato Wave XLR, and a secondary, like more analog mixer that just gets added into that setup, because I don't know how else you're going to manage everything. And I don't think, I think as much as I want there to be a perfect mixer that adds in all of this, I feel like it would be too expensive and there will always be secondary use cases where someone else who isn't me, for example, has a specific input or output that they want that isn't covered. And there's always going to be that missing element. And so I think the future of audio hardware is unfortunately modular, which I think for a lot of setups will work fine. I've experienced the worst side of that with all of my audio pops and crackles and whatever. And so it scares me, other than running, if I can run everything through my Mac, that's great. BEACN Studio currently only supports Windows. They are rolling out Mac support. It will hopefully be available by time units ship, I was told. So that's pretty cool. I will maybe do a short or something on it when that happens. But I'm pretty stoked with this thing. I only have a couple main complaints. The first one being that there's no dedicated speaker output. I would have really loved that because it's kind of annoying to have to do both. I could just plug my headphones into my speakers, but not all speakers have that set up. I like the physical device. I like the plate it gives. I wish it came with some sort of 1/4 inch tap on the bottom or side or something for mounting options just to have it. I think everything needs to start coming with that. And then I only had one weird issue with the, so far the software has all been great. You can also go in, I didn't show it, but you can also go in and change all of the lighting effects. So you can do peak meter, solid color, and that way when you start yelling, it would start changing, which is pretty cool. Or you can make it do spectrum, and then direction is going one way, but backwards is the negative direction. Lots of controls over that. You can enable 4-channel link for the second device if you're using dual PC. Lots of cool stuff here, and so far, the entire software experience has been great. My only complaint, like I was building to, is while I'm talking, if I adjust any of the fader levels in the mixing app or turn the headphone volume dial, which is for the main mix, it crackles a little bit. I don't think it does to the recording, and in fact, I'm going to look at my mix right now and do it as I'm talking. I am talking. It does a little bit of crackling as it's adjusting the volume. It doesn't do that just passively, like it's never happened on its own, or if I do it while there's no sound coming through. I think it's purely to my headphones, just a weird little quirk, something you're probably not going to be doing very often. And even in like Resolve and Audition, even on Mac, like if you adjust some sliders of some effects while it's playing the audio, that happens. Like that's not an unusual thing. Like that's the only bad thing I've encountered. I love this thing. Like this is the ultimate audio interface. I just think it needs a secondary mixing partner. And while yes, BEACN has the mix and mix create, they're not physical audio mixers or interfaces. They are still just controllers. And you'll want that with this thing because it only has the one knob that just controls your headphone mix. You don't have knobs for your outputs or anything. And I think a secondary knob on the other side of it for an audio mix knob or be able to assign it to a specific device's output would be pretty neat. But like any audio interface like this, you'll want to pair it with another mixer of some sort if you start getting into dual PC, triple PC consoles, all that kind of stuff. At this point, I've got like 3 or 4 PCs plus my Mac plus the consoles plus like, and I want headphone output, I want speaker output, I want recording output. So I'm getting pretty advanced with my setups, and I've seen a lot of you all are like blowing past me with complexity of your audio setups. So I know I'm not alone. But for the core audio interface, if you have a Scarlett, if you have an old Behringer Euphoria like 204 HD or something, if you have a basic audio interface and you're looking for the next step, something like the Wave XLR or the BEACN Studio is absolutely where you should be going. It's a little bit more expensive though. It's $250. All the BEACN stuff has been fairly expensive for just an audio interface. That's a lot to ask. Like you can get a Scarlett from Focusrite for like $99, but this blows it out of the water in terms of processing. It's going to make you sound like a god if you can learn EQing. I have a whole video on that specifically within the BEACN software if you want to check that out. It's going to power any microphone. It's got the flexibility of the virtual audio mixing. It's worth considering. Go check out my other video on learning to get the most out of your BEACN mixing software, linked in the video description. Check out our music, both from Analog Dreams and Backing Track, linked below. And remember to be kind, rewind.